girlfriend's brother drove 2 hours into the city of Toronto to buy a sandwich, and then he left without saying hello to anyone. so we spent 4 hours that day driving for one hot chicken sandwich. Very, very good. We're going to be passing in the Chelsea Hotel coming up on our left-hand side. And please do mind the construction going on throughout the city as we've exited winter and entered construction season now. The Chelsea on our left is the largest hotel in Canada, the only one with an indoor-outdoor water slide in the city. As you can see, that pops out of the building on its way down to the ground. But yes, with over 1,500 rooms inside of it, this is the largest hotel in Canada. And coincidentally, it sits beside currently the tallest building in the city. Not just the city, the country. This is the Aura building up at 79 stories right there. So currently that holds the record. 79 stories is the current record. Planned to be beaten pretty recently by there's a few different ones. The Pinnacle, one Bloor Street, which you can see being constructed right ahead of us. Each of these planned to be taller than 89 stories, with the Pinnacle downtown aiming for 102 floors once it's completed. Now, notably, the CN Tower, if you've seen it downtown already, you'll know, significantly taller than the Aura, but that is a structure and not a building, which is the thing that differentiates them. On buildings, you can access every one of those stories over at the CN Tower. You ride that 58-second elevator all the way up to the viewing platforms of the restaurant, and then, of course, you can look out across the city. Compare Toronto to something like New York, of course, we're not limited by the constraints of being built on an island. But here along Yonge Street, where much of that development has happened, take a look up on our right to find a massive mural with some of the major musical acts that have performed along Yonge Street here at places like College Park, Yonge and Dundas, various bars like Friars and Piccadilly Tube. College Park here on our left was developed back in the 1930s, and as you can see, it's got this great Art Deco design to it. One big problem with College Park, the blueprint of this building originally had it stand 38 stories tall. And if you do a quick count of the floors, it's not that tall. It's about 7 stories. Because after that 7th floor, we entered the Great Depression of the 1930s, and the project rapidly ran out of funding. So it had to be essentially abandoned and finalized at that point. Up on that 7th floor, though, luckily they were able to complete the Jazz Lounge and Bar. And once again, take a look behind you at the other side of that building and the extension of that mural. You can see a few other major performers that played there. Up at the College Park Jazz Lounge, we had Frank Sinatra, Louis Armstrong, Aretha Franklin all performed there on their various tours here to Toronto, including Glenn Gould, very famous Canadian piano player, who recorded some of his albums up there because he liked the acoustics of the space so much. Across Carlton just here and make the first little diversion from the day tour. So the night tour does go a slightly different route than the day tour if you were joining us a bit earlier on. We're going to go up through a few great areas like the Village all around the University of Toronto and get up close and personal with Chinatown in just a bit. For any movie fans, highly recommend the Carlton here on the left. This is one of my favorite theaters in the city. It's independently owned. They got $5 and $3 movie nights there for anything in their catalog. The popcorn is better than it is at Cineplex, which is the major theater chain of mine throughout Toronto. So if you're looking to see a movie, check out the Carlton right there. But I can't not miss Maple Leaf Gardens here on the left here. Maple Leaf Gardens started as the, first stadium the Toronto Maple Leafs played from. Nowadays, they play downtown out of Scotiabank Arena. Luckily, the major portions of the building, including the marquee, were preserved as it was converted into the Mattamy Athletic Centre for the Toronto Metropolitan University, campus of which is just here to our south. As well as this Loblaws grocery store, but if you go into that grocery store and you find aisle 22, there's a little blue dot on the ground indicating right where center ice used to be, so you can stand exactly in the spot of many of the most famous players in hockey where they first faced off right here at Maple Leaf Gardens. As we make our way north, you're going to notice there's an increasing amount of, pride flags, rainbows, lights all around here. We're entering into what's known as the Village. This has been the heart of Toronto's LGBT community since about the 60s. and was also the initiating point for the annual, I should say, Pride Parade that happens at the end of every June. So that just happened about 2 months ago. Pride Parade always has a major series of floats go down on Yonge Street, where we started, but over here on Church Street, this gets shut down into a big fairground with activities and, you know, samples, dancers, DJs, dance floors, tons and tons of stuff happening here. Lots of people in costume, lots of people not in costume as well. In fact, wearing slightly too little clothing, in my opinion. But this is a wonderful area to check out. Great bars like Cruise and Tango's on our left, the preeminent drag bar in Toronto, where you'll see some people lip sync and dance along to all the greatest and latest classics. Lots of great bars and restaurants. If you go far enough to the north, eventually you'll find Storm Crow Manor, which is this old Victorian era manor house that's totally been redesigned to look like locations from sci-fi, video games, movies, TV shows. So about 1 more block to the north here, Storm Crow Manor. Storm like bad weather, crow like the bird. But you can get like a drink at the bar from The Shining, the Mos Eisley Cantina from Star Wars. You got a Rancor head mounted over the fireplace and Han Solo frozen to the wall. The Red Room from Twin Peaks. It's kind of a fun place to explore, so I don't want to spoil all the things you can find in there. But it's a great area to check out. But yes, if you do find yourself around here in the village, this is always going to be a great place to get some drinks late into the night. We're going to turn across Wellesley here in just a moment and start making our way over towards the Ontario Legislature buildings as well, the headquarters or Capitol building of Ontario. The city. Of course, it is past rush hour quite significantly, but with the construction that happens in Toronto and the amount of people on the roads, oftentimes this doesn't matter. But it looks pretty clear so far, so we're going to be making our way throughout the city unabated. Getting all the way back to Yonge Dundas was about 9:30, 9:40. So as you make your way around Toronto while you're visiting here, if you're not using the tour buses, the other great way to get around the city is, of course, the TTC, or Toronto Transit Commission. That's the subways, the streetcars, the buses that go all across Toronto. One major station of which will be coming up on our right just in a moment, Wellesley Station right here. The entire map of the TTC subway is not very complicated. I can draw it out really quick. You've got the number 1 line, which goes like this, and the number 2 line, which goes like that, and that's the whole thing. So very difficult to get lost on it. You're either going north or south, or east or west. In fact, a lot of the street signs around here help you orient yourself too. You'll see it says Wellesley Street E on our left here beneath that green P, because we are east of Yonge. On the other side, it becomes Wellesley Street W for west of Yonge. And this, of course, is Yonge, where we first got started right here. Yonge is more or less the spine of Toronto. This is the main street that runs all the way through the city. It's the oldest street we have in the city, despite the name, which is not spelled Young like the age. It's Y-O-N-G-E. So don't call it Yonge Street, it's Yonge Street. Named after this guy, Samuel Young, who was a professor over at the University of Toronto. He specialized in ancient Roman roadways. So naming that major road after him only makes sense. There is one more big fact that some of you might already know about Yonge Street, though. It was declared by Guinness World Records the longest street in the entire world at 1,896 kilometers. It starts at the waterfront of Toronto, passes up through the city, and then it keeps going. It goes through northern Ontario, gradually wrapping around to a small town called Rainy River on the Minnesota border. So we held that record for a few years, and then Guinness World Records actually took it away from us when they realized technically once Yonge leaves Toronto, it's designated Highway 11. So it's still one continuous road. Nonetheless, you don't make any turns off of it, but due to that technicality, they took away the record. Please write to Guinness World Records once you get off this bus a little bit later on, because we want that back. We had tallest tower with CN Tower, and then in 2008, of course, the Burj Khalifa took that from us. So We're just losing records left and right. As we make our way across. Now it is slightly overcast today, but we should get a wonderful golden hour that lights up many of the iconic buildings of Toronto, including one of my favorite, one of the most ornate. A little bit hidden at the moment, but just as we arrive at Queen's Park, we're going to find the legislature, the headquarters of Ontario's politics. So Canada's divided up into provinces and territories instead of states, like you would in the United States, for example. Right now you're in the province of Ontario. And here in Ontario, that on our left, known as the Pink Palace, this is the legislature building. That's where members of provincial parliament and the Premier, Doug Ford, will meet up to pass new laws and legislation, which of course, well, regulates the entire province. They don't manage everything. There's some things that are federal and some things that are municipal, but they do manage what you're allowed to do in parks. This on our left is Queen's Park, and due to some recent legislation being passed right there at the Ontario Legislature building, you're now allowed to drink in public parks. Yay! So pick up some local Ontario brews while you're here and experience that new right that we've just been given. So this on our left is Queen's Park. This started as a piece of the University of Toronto. They used this to study trees. Every type of tree native to Canada was actually flown in from across the country, transplanted right up here. Now just watch our heads here as we pass underneath these branches. We're going to make our way across. There may be a few low-hanging branches on either side of the bus from time to time, so I'll call those out whenever I see them coming, but please be aware of those. So eventually Queen's Park has been made into a massive public park, as it is today, of course. People use it for jogging, picnics, dancing, playing sports, meeting up with friends. But it is, of course, still owned by the university. It was decided to protect this area. They don't want anything developed here. They don't want any condos or apartments or any retail space being built here, as this is one of the largest downtown parks we have. So they're loaning it to the city on a lease that lasts 999 years. And the city is paying a whopping $1 a year for that lease. So taking on a lot of maintenance and upkeep responsibilities, sure, but essentially preserving this area so it doesn't get redeveloped. Oftentimes Queen's Park and a lot of the downtown parks are a great place to do some urban wildlife spotting as well, be that the black squirrels that we have hopping around that are apparently very iconic here in Toronto, and I didn't realize that because I've always seen squirrels as black around here. Then people started coming and said, hey, why aren't they brown or gray? And we have some of those too, but across Toronto, if you can spot some of these little guys hopping around, they basically look like these jet black shadows. Oh, there, over on the left, just behind the Whitewood College sign, you see a little guy just there. Regardless, we have now entered into the University of Toronto. So around here, this is the university's oldest campus, known as King's College Campus, or the St. George Campus, because the street right ahead of us is St. George. Over on our left is the original King's College building, the oldest portion of the university, first founded all the way back in 1827. Now, U of T, University of Toronto, typically claims the spot of top #1 university in Canada. And this is unfortunately not true, because I went to Western University in London, Ontario, about 2 hours away, substantially better than this hunk of junk. No. Okay, fine. It's, I guess, #1, but it's only because of the size of its student body. You have a massive amount of people attending school here. Over 95,000 students attend university here at the University of Toronto. Many of them reading inside Robarts Library, of course, a very iconic building on our right, which is meant to resemble a peacock, if you're able to see it. It's got that head at the front, that kind of bird beak at the front, and the tail feathers all spread out behind it. One big issue with this building was it was built back in the 70s when brutalism was super popular, so they used a ton of concrete, cement, and round windows. So because it's not very colorful, a lot of students on campus call this the turkey instead of the peacock, because they think it kind of resembles that a bit more. It kind of looks like a Viking ship. We can squabble. The main point is everybody hates this building in Toronto. I will defend it because at least it has some cool personality with the bird thing, but it was officially voted the second ugliest building in the entire city. We've got on our right here Graduate House, and this is a student residence for graduate students. Of course, masters and doctorate students, they are the only people that are allowed to live in this building right here on campus. It's very close to all the different faculties they have to attend. And comparably to other rent around the city, I know through a friend, George, that lives here, it's reasonable. You have like 2 or 3 people to a shared unit space. You all have your own rooms, but you have kind of a shared living room space. It's about $1,300 a month. Mind you, the average 1-bedroom apartment in Toronto is going between $2,000 and $2,500 a month right now. So it's very, very pricey to live in the city, especially if you're working on a minimum wage job, for instance. Right above us here, though, this little walkway you can see has kind of this O at the end of it. And from the other side, you'll see it actually says University of Toronto. So all those letters are on the glass, but the only physical one is this O right above us. So this was supposed to be a little walkway here, showing how university's always building into the future. It's never quite finished. But it was also supposed to be a little walkway that the residents here could kind of go out on to get some fresh air. But this has never been officially opened to the public because this was quickly determined to be a bad idea. So they have blocked it off internally. No one's actually able to go out on that walkway. Looks great on paper, I'm sure, but in practicality, not a great idea to just let people wander out there late at night. So watch our heads once again, passing underneath some of these low branches. Thank you, Beirut. So you'll spot some iconic Canadian imagery sitting on the top of these poles running just beside the streetcar tracks here. Now you might call them trams in other parts of the world, but here in Toronto and a few other areas, they're known as streetcars. So these are the trains that run on the ground level tracks, getting power right from these wires overhead here. And they're another key part of the TTC that will get you across Toronto. Right ahead of us, a major building known as the Daniels Building. Now, this is the university's architecture, landscaping, and design faculty, and you can see all 3 of those elements on display as we slowly turn around it here. You got the, landscaping portion just in the front of it, followed by the modernist architecture segment right in the middle, which is itself attached on to the original address of 1 Spadina. This building started as a courthouse, but as we kind of circle around it, you'll see it turn from that hyper-modern building to this very old, early 1800s structure that first stood here. Old enough that when the road Spadina was built, of course, you had to divert itself around the building. So you'll find that in a few parts of Toronto, there's sometimes buildings and areas, parks and schools old enough that major streets have actually had to be diverted around them because they came later in the city's history. As we make our way down south, first, great view of the CN Tower just ahead of us on the left there, over the Toronto skyline. As we make our way up along Spadina here, check out on our right El Macambo Tavern, notable for hosting some of the biggest and best upcoming indie and alternative bands in Toronto. Pop-up performances from the likes of the Rolling Stones, Kiss, AC/DC. That was where Rush and other big Canadian names first got their starts performing at the El Macambo. Just continuing south here, we're going to continue to see, of course, a lot of Mandarin appearing on the signs and the shops around here as we more officially enter into Chinatown. Toronto is known as having the 2nd largest Chinatown on the planet after San Francisco. So you can find a massive population of Chinese Canadians, of course, living in Toronto and across Canada broadly. Many, many great restaurants that you'll find around here. Some cool video game stores, vintage clothing outlets, bulk wholesale stores and souvenir shops. And a recently very famous restaurant. Has anyone been following the Kendrick versus Drake beef by chance? So he references a restaurant on the right, New Ho King, where he said, I'll be at New Ho King getting fried rice, whatever. Kendrick destroys Drake, but that is the exact restaurant he references in the song, and it got so much attention because of that name drop that it's been able to get a bunch of money, re-up its reservation on that spot, its rent or whatever, and the owner has officially added Drake fried rice to the menu. Over on our right down here, we have Kensington Market, of course. If you look into there, right now it is actually closed off for the night market. Kensington Market's a wonderful area of the city to explore. It's got this very like bohemian, artsy kind of area. It's very weird in a good way. It's a lot of street performers and musicians, and of course market spaces. Oftentimes in the summers they'll shut down that street so cars can't drive through there. It becomes a whole walking area of the city. Due to the shape of the streets there, it's not very popular for cars to pass through there anyways, so oftentimes it's more or less a walking street even when it's not officially closed off. But back there, of course, some great vintage outlets and thrift shops, restaurants. There's a cool fusion restaurant there called Rasta Pasta, which was created by a Italian-Jamaican couple that moved here to Toronto. So one half runs the Rasta side, one half runs the pasta side, and of course they have a few combo dishes, but also some ethnic specialties from each of their respective backgrounds. You'll always know you enter into Kensington when you pass by the cute little cat standing on top of the chair right there. Now, Toronto hasn't always had a massive Chinese population here. This has developed many times over the years. Various waves of immigration have happened that have brought people here to Toronto. Even the streetcars around here, you can see, are distinguished by just stand between those two poles, guarded by dragons, of course, and wait for the next ride. Back in 1872, we ran a census in Toronto to collect a lot of data. One of the big things was ethnic origin, and there was recorded to be exactly one Chinese man in the entire city named Sam. Over the following decades, that number rapidly ballooned because we had thousands of Chinese immigrants come to Canada to work on the CPR, Canadian Pacific Railway, which was a notoriously deadly project because of how many people were, used essentially to build it across the country. Now, a lot of these were working-age men coming from Hong Kong, which was controlled by the British at the time, so they were able to organize immigration papers to make their way here to Canada. And after working on that train line, many of them would eventually make their way here to Toronto, settling in what was then known as Chinatown, a little bit further across the city. Chinatown moved here in the 1960s, but this is getting a bit pedantic. Regardless, back then, the gender ratio in Chinatown was a little bit skewed because it was mostly working-age men. There was about one woman for every 80 men in the neighborhood at the time. Very, very difficult to find girlfriends back then. As we make our way across this intersection here, big spider's web of electric wiring overhead. As you can see, this is where the streetcars get their power from. And as you notice, those big metal arms that reach up and touch onto the wires, they do have sparks traveling between them because these are always live. These have live power running through them 24/7. Regardless, and needless to say, please do not touch these wires when we're running beneath them. You're going to get an incredibly bad shock. They are constantly running with power. And if you're not killed by the shock, you will be billed by the city for stealing electricity from the Toronto energy grid, and no one wants to have to pay that on their way out, of course. So as we continue making our way here across Chinatown, a few more iconic restaurants and shops around here. House of Gourmet on the left, one of my personal favorites here. Honestly, any restaurant that has barbecue duck hanging in the window, you can tell is going to be absolutely boss. Incredible food you can find around here. And arguably the most iconic Canadian gift store in the entire city, Canada Gifts on the left, which is exactly what it says it is. Once this streetcar continues moving ahead, we're going to continue across Dundas right here, and this will take us over towards the AGO, Art Gallery of Ontario. But for the time being, just sit back and enjoy Chinatown as we continue through. Moose. As you can see, there's a large statue, of course, dressed up. Now, these moose are kind of a standard moose sculpture. It's kind of hard to describe what I mean, but if you look around Toronto, you'll start stumbling upon these. there's a standard moose sculpture people buy and then kind of dress up to customize it and give it more personality depending on where it pops up in the city. So of course, they've done that here for Chinatown. Over at a girls' school called St. Clement's, they've got an identical moose, but instead it's wearing the blazer and uniform of the students there, and so on and so forth. AGO is this big sculpture on our right with the glass facade, the Art Gallery of Ontario, specializing in both Canadian artists, but also a lot of international artists, including Vincent van Gogh. If you're a fan of Van Gogh, you'll get to see him just coming up on our left here with that yellow backing. Try to make eye contact with Van Gogh's portrait as we drive by. You might notice he does something a little bit funky, right? He's actually turning to look right back at you guys as well. Okay, Vincent, how's it going? Take it easy, buddy. Get over her. She's not worth it. We have up on our right this big sculpture of the elephant as well. This is Jumbo the elephant. Now Jumbo was a very popular circus elephant owned by P.T. Barnum's Circus from the 1960s or 1860s to the 1890s. He traveled across Canada and the United States, but unfortunately was actually killed here in Ontario during one of the shows. They were transporting him from one show to another, and in the train yard when they were changing around cars, he was actually hit by a train. So this became a massive figure of Canada animal rights law. So here you can see he's made out of pieces of leather furniture. So artist is talking a bit about how he was treated more as property or an object rather than a living thing. But Jumbo's death inspired thousands and thousands of people across Canada to turn up and push for international, the earliest animal rights legislation in the country's history, protecting animals like that. We don't really have circuses in Canada in the same way. We of course do have things like Marine World, which have essentially qualified themselves as a zoo. But we have zoos, of course, for preservation and learning purposes, education purposes, but we cannot have circuses that train animals to do tricks on command and things like that. So we're going to be crossing University Avenue in just one moment, and once again, we'll get a great view of the Ontario Legislature off our left-hand side once we cross University here with the lights, as well as the hospital or Discovery District. This is where many of the major research centers of the city are, well, right beside each other along our bill. You'll see, of course, some hospital medical evac helicopters flying around here as well, bringing in patients from wherever it was they ended up. But Toronto General Hospital, Sick Kids Hospital, Mount Sinai, all of those would be just off our left to the north of us. And they make up the UHN, or University Health Network, a big collection of hospitals around here that actually have a massive underground series of tunnels that connect them together so that you can get patients from one department to another, depending on if one can, of course, offer better medical support. While we're here, we have over on our right, Police Station, Division 52. Now, the building itself, not that interesting. It's what's inside that counts. Inside that police station, a very iconic photo in Toronto's history was taken. Many of you guys might have seen this before. It was a smiling Justin Bieber's mugshot after he turned himself in on DUI charges. So there's a iconic photo of Justin Bieber kind of like awkwardly smiling at the camera, taken right there, of course, Police Station Division 52. Once we cross over University Avenue once again, so if you want to see more of the legislature from the front, you can look off the left. But if you want to see a great view of the CN Tower and Canada Life Building, I recommend you look down to the right to downtown Toronto as we pass by a sculpture nicknamed Gumby Goes to Heaven by locals. Now, along this stretch here, there is, a lot of Chinese, Japanese, and Korean restaurants that we'll find. This area was historically called Little Tokyo because this is where the Japanese residents lived just beside the original Chinatown. So to our south here would have been, Chinatown initially, but in the 1960s, that neighborhood was actually appropriated by Toronto and made into the space of New City Hall. So everyone living in that neighborhood, having just had many of their houses essentially bulldozed to make space for New City Hall, shifted down Dundas over to Dundas and Spadina, which is why Chinatown is now located all the way over there. Dundas Street itself was broadly untouched, which is why you can still find many iconic restaurants along here to this day. right ahead of us with the big flashy LED screen and the Sam the Record Man sign there. That's Young Dundas Square once again, where we started the tour. We're not going to be passing through there. You're still with me for a while, guys. I'm going to turn down on Bay Street here, though, and get us over to the new and old City Hall buildings. Now you can see it best at night, but we have the spinning Sam the Record Man sign just on the top of that. An iconic music store here in downtown Toronto, which has been closed since the 1990s. But they determined that sign to be so iconic that the city actually purchased it off the owner and hired the original neon artist to refurbish it, to repair some of the burnt out tubes. So it now forever spins right there at Young Dundas Square. It is also lit up during the day for whatever reason, even though you can't really see it during the day, and honestly it has caused the neon to kind of wear out a little bit faster, so we're probably going to have to replace it once again in the near future. But here we go, heading down Bay Street. We've got new City Hall coming up on our right, the big curved concrete building that you'll see here, as well as Old City Hall, which will be ahead of us on the left, with the big glowing windows and the stone. There's a bunch of details to Old City Hall, and I think I just like that one more than New City Hall. You get a good view of it from down on Queen Street, but you just can't beat Old City Hall's clock tower and the gargoyles hanging off the side of it. Come on, we don't build buildings with gargoyles anymore. So you got some gargoyles here. They're made out of fiberglass because originally they were made out of, well, stone and metal, and people were concerned about what would happen if they detached from the building, so they opted to replace them with fiberglass back in the 1990s. Nowadays it's only really used for administrative space, but we're starting to get a better view of New City Hall just behind us on the right there, which is actually two curved buildings with an almost UFO-shaped council chamber sitting right between them there. You see that kind of flying saucer building right in the middle.